This week, Edinburgh City Council declared a housing emergency 4 months after Argyll and Bute did the same thing. Basically, they're saying there simply isn't enough affordable housing and something urgently needs to be done. The charity shelters say it's a problem, in fact, right across the whole country. So let's have a look at the situation, shall we, in just a bit more detail. Across Scotland as a whole, rents have gone up on average 6% in the past year. But hang on, you're saying. I thought the Scottish Government capped rent rises at 3%. And yep, you'd be right. So what's going on? Well, that 3% limit only applies to the lease, not to the property. So let's give you an example. Let's say 4 people are sharing a flat and one of those 4 moves out. That is a break in the lease. So the landlord can use that moment as a chance to put up the rent. And they often do, by a lot. In Edinburgh, rents have gone up 92% in the past decade. A 2-bedroom flat in the city costs an average of more than £1,400 a month to rent just now. That's Edinburgh, but Glasgow isn't faring much better. Rents there have gone up 82% in a decade. And, as we all know only too well, salaries haven't, have they? In rural areas, the problem's a bit more nuanced. Booming tourism means lots of properties are used as second homes or short-term lets there, and that can be a lucrative business. So houses sell for a lot of money. Locals, therefore, are being priced out of what is a shrinking market. In Argyll and Bute, around 7% of all properties are now classified as someone's second home. So around the country, a lot of people are finding they simply can't afford anywhere to live. And that's where social housing should come in. But it's not, for a lot of them anyway. Currently, there are 110,000 households, that's individuals or families, on social housing waiting lists in Scotland. That's people like Stacey Grieve. She and her 6-year-old son are homeless just now and stuck in temporary accommodation. They've been in the same flat for 4 years. But now, the owner, who rents the flat to Edinburgh Council, who give it to Stacey, wants it back. On Thursday, our social affairs correspondent, Chris Clements, went to see Stacey. And as they were filming, there was a knock at the door. Let's have a look at a bit of Chris's report. And a warning, it is quite a hard watch or listen. You might find some of this a bit upsetting.
Every day, my nerves are on edge. Trying to be positive.
There's a knock at the door.
Give them a wee call and look after yourself, okay?
Thank you.
No, and thanks for your time, Stacey.
Sorry, sir. Thank you. This is some just gave me my court letter.
What does it say?
I don't know.
Do you want me to have a read of it? It's a court summons asking her to attend in December.
No, my boy's birthday's on the 8th. Perfect timing. This is what Edinburgh Council do. They take you homeless, they'll put you in a PSL house and they forget about you.
Well, I should tell you that Chris and his team have been in touch with Stacey regularly since that was filmed, and she is actually happy, keen, in fact, for people to see that footage because she wants to highlight the issue. Let's speak now to the Scottish Government's Housing Minister, Paul Mclennan. Good morning to you, Mr Mclennan. Thanks very much indeed for being with us.
Good morning, Martin.
Really difficult stuff, that. Stacey and her son could be in a hospital, hostel rather, before Christmas. And, you know, it's not just them. They're representative of a whole lot of people. Would you accept that a crisis is not too strong a word to describe the situation we've got across the country at the moment in terms of housing?
I think we've got very challenging circumstances at the moment right across Scotland, and obviously since being in post in March I've tried to bring in a number of measures to try and deal with that. My previous background was as a councillor for 15 years, and any councillor will tell you the biggest issue that they face is housing and homelessness. So unfortunately I'd seen some cases over the years when I was a councillor similar to Stacey's, and my thoughts go out to her, and happy to help with her and engage with her after the programme if details can be passed on.
Yeah, there are, as we were saying, 110,000 households on social housing lists across Scotland, a shortage of 110,000 homes, mortgage approvals are down, rents are going through the roof. You're the minister, as you say, you're in charge of this. Just help us to understand, how has this come about? I mean, you know, this has been a problem for years. It's been a lack of action for a long, long time. What's your take on how we've come to be where we are?
I think at the moment there are a number of reasons, as you touched upon. I think that high interest rates, obviously, at the moment are impacting on the circumstances at the moment. That's obviously impacting on new starts. One of the key things, I think, for me, and keen to emphasise, it needs an all-tenure approach. So that's working with house builders, that's working with housing associations, local authorities and so on. So the high interest rates are obviously impeding local authorities, are impeding housing associations from building as well. That's an issue. And I think the high borrowing costs are obviously impacting quite considerably. I've been speaking quite a lot to housing associations who were budgeting for around about interest rates being around about 2 or 3%. And when they're speaking to their lenders, they're around about 6 or 7%. So that's putting a slowdown on housing associations just now. It comes down to supply and demand, and that's the key thing. We need to be building more houses, and that's what I've been working very hard with local authorities, housing associations and others on to try and increase that. And to put it into context, we build 40% more per head of population affordable homes than England and 70% more in Wales, but that's not enough. We need to be doing more.
The UK government says it's 2.2 million new homes have been built since 2010. They're on course to build 1 million in the current parliamentary term.
Yeah, well, as I said, when you look at the context, Martin, we build 40% more head of population, more homes than England, and 70% more than Wales. And these are actual figures that come through. So we have a good record. We've delivered about 125,000 houses since 2007. But
right, we're 110,000 short.
But I acknowledge we need to be building more. But we've got to look at the context. My budget I have is £3.5 billion. I've spoken to the UK government around about could we get increased borrowing powers to look at that. But if we get more money to build more houses, we'd be building houses at a quicker pace. The answer to that, unfortunately, was no. So I've got to look around about how I bring more money into the sector. So I've been speaking, for example, to institutional investors. Just 3 weeks ago, I spoke to 25 institutional investors down London about investing in social housing, investing in build-to-rent and mid-market rent. And I think we've other meetings coming up with other investors looking at that as well. So I've got to look at other measures about how we can bring monies into the sector to build more houses.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, there'll be people watching, listening to this saying meetings are one thing, let's get spades in the ground. But you've allocated £3.5 billion to this, and you say that's going to build, I think, 110,000 new affordable homes over the next 9 years.
No, the 3.5, Martin, is over this parliamentary term.
Right.
So obviously from 26 to 32 there'll be a new parliamentary term, and obviously assess what we need to do. We've already committed to, we'll be looking at that at mid-term around about 2026. So £3.5 billion is in this parliamentary term that we've committed to.
But that 110,000 homes is enough to precisely, in fact, satisfy the needs of the waiting list just now. It's not going to be complete until 9 years from now. Shelter are saying it's progressing at a snail's pace. I know you built 11,000 last year, but they're saying there's no figures. In fact, the BBC, I think, asked you for figures on your projections for the years ahead. There's a suggestion there's a problem with planning permission, all that kind of stuff. Are you going to be on track for this? Yeah,
I'm confident we're on track. Obviously, one of the key things, I think, for me, having my local authority background, I've tried to get around most local authorities in the time I've been in office, 7 months. Probably got around about 2/3. There are 32 local authorities. There are 32 different solutions. So I'm obviously focusing on getting around key local authorities, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Fife, North Lanarkshire, for example, who deliver a large number of houses, and trying to get a nuanced position in terms of that. But we need to be doing more, and I can touch on that, and about what we're doing about homelessness, what we're doing around about the affordable housing supply programme as well, focusing on some of the key local authorities.
Okay, look, Sir Keir Starmer said if he gets into power, he's effectively going to go to war on any local authorities who are blocking this. They're going to build on what they said they call the grey belt. I think that's part of the green belt. But anyway, whatever it is, they're saying there's houses going to go up everywhere, and it's a very popular policy. Why don't you just clack heads together? You say you're going around talking to local authorities one at a time. Why don't you just slap the desk and say this is what's happening?
I have collaborative meetings with Edinburgh and Glasgow all the time. For example, I've probably met Edinburgh and Glasgow on a monthly basis, and Fife probably around about the same. And I think that it's collaboration that we require. As I mentioned, we require an all-tenure approach. So we have regular meetings with Homes for Scotland, with Scottish Federation Housing Associations, with local authorities, and what we can do around about planning, what we can do around about bringing land forward, what we can try and do around about the flexibility about building in our own areas. And it's not just in urban Scotland as well. We recently announced a rural housing action plan. So in the summertime, I undertook a tour of rural Scotland, talking to how we increased house building in other parts of Scotland as well, and we brought out a plan on that just a few weeks ago. So it's all parts of Scotland we're trying to concentrate on, and it is working very closely with each of the 32 local authorities to do that.
Let me ask you about existing stock. We're looking at a generation of young people who are really struggling. As we said, rent in Edinburgh up 92% in a decade. Glasgow not much better. Your rental policy has, well-intentioned as it may have been, has cooked the market, hasn't it? People are just bailing out and selling their rental flats.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I think if you look
It's what everybody tells you is happening if you ask.
Well, if you actually look at some of the figures, I think there are some key things. The housing in Edinburgh and Glasgow is probably around about 12 or 13% in rental costs. If you look at, for example, in Manchester, London, Cardiff, they're all about the similar increases as well. It's about supply and demand, and this is where, you know, the concentration, for example, around about Edinburgh and Glasgow, how do we bring more houses forward in terms of that? And I think that's the key, you know, where do we look at strategic sites in Edinburgh? I am sitting down talking to Edinburgh and about west of Edinburgh, and that's the next key strategic site, and met with 5 or 6 of the key
But that
areas.
doesn't help people whose rents are doubling right now.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about obviously where the rent controls are. As part of the housing bill, we look at longer term rent controls, and I think that's the key thing around about that. So we're working on that.
But does
to
that
try
not
and
just
get
mean that people who own the flats are going to sell them? If you make it unprofitable to rent out your second home, then people are just going to sell them, and there's less properties to rent, price goes up.
No, I think it's trying to get a balance. Obviously, we've got to try and protect people through the cost of living crisis. I think obviously the private rented sector, and I've been speaking to them recently as well, is an important part of that housing mix. So we've got to make sure that we are protecting people who are in that situation around about a cost of living crisis, but also making sure the private rented sector continues to thrive, because it is a key ingredient as we move towards, as I said, the 110,000 houses. And
Right, you
I'll be
don't
engaging in
accept
that
in any
sector.
way that your rent restrictions, your rent cap has caused the problem, or exacerbated the problem.
No, if you look at the evidence, for example, in rent control, looking at rents in England, they're up very similar. Manchester, London, Cardiff are all up very similar aspects as they are in Scotland. But you know, as we move towards the housing bill, it's given policy clarity to the sector, private rented sector, and given that reassurance to people who live in obviously private rented sector that they've still got the protection and the rents don't increase more than they need to.
In the minute we've got left, Mr. McLennan, your government launched its latest white paper yesterday, or last week, entitled "Migration to Scotland After Independence." You didn't say how many people needed to come, but you said lots of people did. Andrew Wilson, in his Growth Commission report, said 400,000 people need to come to Scotland. Where are they going to live?
Well, again, that's a challenge, and I came back to the point around about borrowing powers. At the moment, I can't get more borrowing powers. We've asked the UK government for that. With an independent Scotland, we would have the borrowing powers like every other independent country. So we'd be building houses at a much quicker pace. Well, you know, with one key thing with a house, it has an income stream that comes in. So you know, that's the key difference. So as an independent country, we would have borrowing powers to build more houses. And I wish the UK government would give us that ability to do that now.
A point you have made in the past and have made again.